Okay, so the motivation of our research work is the idea that we think that although I mean there is a lot of research on global value chains, there is still quite limited research with a focus on policies within global value chains. So what we did was to organize a special collection of papers which have been published in the Journal of International Business Policy with the intent of addressing mainly two research questions. The first one is, how do GVC policies differ from other policies such as innovation, industrial, and international business policies? And the second one is to try to understand what is the evolution path of these GVC-oriented policies. We have collected a very varied empirical evidence in terms of countries. We have cases from South Africa, Malawi, China, Bangladesh, but also developed countries such as the UK. And there is also quite a lot of differentiation in terms of industries. Papers on the agricultural sector or on the car industry, on the pharmaceutical industry. So it's a collection of 11 articles, and also from the methodological point of view, these articles are quite different in the sense that there are some qualitative case studies, but there are also some quantitative studies using different kind of data sources. So the content of my speech today will be mainly based on the editorial introductory article I wrote together with Carlo Pietrobelli and Dari Vanash, trying to make a sense of this very wide empirical evidence. So in order to discuss and to understand these GVC-oriented policies, we have introduced a framework, which is a framework based on three pillars. The first one is the objective of this policy. The second one is the economic rationale behind the different type of policies we have identified based on objectives. And the third pillar are the different policy instruments used in these different type of policies. And then we have introduced this trifecta of tasks, linkages, and firms, on the basis of which, as I will explain you, we try to justify whether and how GVC-oriented policies differ from traditional public policy. So this is basically what I'm going to discuss today. So let me start from the objectives of GVC-oriented policies. We have identified four categories of objectives, and therefore identified four different types of GVC-oriented policies. The first one is GVC participation policies, which are those policies in which the scope, the main scope, is to enter into GVC and to enhance the local participation in GVC. The second category is GVC value capture policies, and in this case the objective is to strengthen value creation and to capture value added in GVC. Then we have the third category, and this is GVC inclusiveness policies. And in this case, the objective is to improve social and environmental conditions in GVC. And finally, and quite important in the last, in the most recent period, are GVC resiliency policies. So those policies trying to strengthen the local economic resilience when countries or firms are involved in GVC. So these are four categories of different type of GVC-oriented policies. And for these four different type of GVC-oriented policies, we have tried to find in the literature and to explain the economic rationales behind them. So starting from GVC participation policies, these type of policies are mainly horizontal policies. So policies which are aiming to reduce market distortions, and mainly we can think about policies aimed at market enabling, so improving the business environment basically, and policies to improve connection, which could be both a physical or a digital connection. So somehow the GVC participation policies are quite close to traditional policies we have in mind in terms of market enabling policies. Quite different are GVC value capture policies, because in this case, mainly we are referring to vertical policies. And also the justification is quite different, because the justification of value capture policies is in relation with the clear power asymmetries existing in GVC between lead firms and suppliers. Are also justified by the cost, risk, and uncertainty which are involved in the upgrading process, and also by the fact that this upgrading process is not only concerning the companies, the suppliers directly involved in GVC, but can also generate a spillover to the rest of the economy. And finally, there is clearly a problem of coordination of different actors along the chain. Moving to GVC inclusiveness policies, these are in relation to the fact that within GVC, lead firms are clearly potentially powerful actors which can be useful and helpful in terms of promoting social and environmental upgrading. But this cannot be taken for given, and lead firms need motivation, and lead firms need support from national and supranational policies. And finally, as I was saying, there are the GVC resiliency policies, and these are, policies which have been addressed quite a lot recently, because are trying to address resiliency within GVC, which means our policies aim to addressing countries' ability to deliver essential goods and services, and two different dimensions from this point of view need to be taken in consideration. First of all, diversification, which means how much a country supply base of essential goods is diversified, to be not excessively dependent on specific countries. And the other dimension is substitution. So what is the country capacity to have substitute in case of disruption of an existing GVC? And the substitution depend on the existence of a domestic or regional buffer stocks, or can also depend on the ability of a country to rapidly switch domestic capacity to the production of for instance, substitute of some essential goods. So resilience has been quite a lot discussed in these last 2 years, I would say. For instance, in relation with all the GVC for medical devices. There are some interesting articles and studies by Gary Gareffi on these specific global value chains. So, moving to policy instrument, given the different objectives of the different type of policy, also policy instruments tend to be quite diverse in the different type of policy. In the case of GVC, participation policies, which, as I was saying before, are mainly vertical policies, we can think about, I mean, all these general kind of policies we know for creating a favorable business environment. All the trade policy aim at eliminate trade obstacle, policies to strengthen competition, policy to improve transport and digital infrastructure, and general education and training policies to improve human capital. The second type of policy, the GVC value capture policies, as I was saying, are mainly horizontal policies. And in this case, some of the instruments that could seem quite similar to the previous one, but in fact they are different. For instance, think about education and training policy. In the case of the first type of policy, we can think about general education policies. In the case of GVC value capture policies, what we have in mind are policies aimed at improving specific skills, which are those skills needed within a specific GVC for instance, upgrading. So it's not general education policies, it's building up specific human capacity in specific skills. The same is true for the building up of infrastructure. In the case of GVC participation policy, it means to generally improve the transportation system. In the case of GVC value capture policies, could imply building up some kind of transport infrastructure for this, I don't know, for some the necessity of some specific GVC. Then we have very important, all the policies aim at building up a supply of advisory services, and very important in are all those services related with in the areas of standard metrology, testing, and certification. So, as you can see, in the case of value capture participation policy, we are thinking about specific instrument aimed at building up human infrastructure, technological capacity, aimed at strengthening the capacity in a specific GVC for with the scope of upgrading. GVC inclusiveness policies, in this case, of course, part of this type of policy are all the intervention aimed at creating, introducing and implementing regulations in terms of labor, social, and in relation with labor, social, and environmental issues. Other type of instrument could be responsible sourcing policies, the promotion of private standards, and also the involvement of local communities in GVC governance. I just would like to refer to one of the papers which is included in our collection about Malawi, which is quite interesting and addressing an issue which, as far as I know, is quite new in the GVC GVC literature, and is how the local community can be part of the GVC governance. So it's introducing this dimension of local community in the GVC governance issue. And finally, GVC resiliency policies. In this case, we can think about supply chain resilience, stress test, public procurement policy, reshoring policy, diversification policy. So as you can see, the different type of policies are aimed at different objectives, and the type of instrument, which of course there could be overlap, but the type of instrument used in the different type of policy could be very different. So this is what I want to say about the characteristic of these different GVC-oriented policies. Now I would like to focus on this trifecta, trying to use this this idea of task, linkages, and firms in order to explain and to justify the specificity of GVC-oriented policies with respect to traditional policies, industrial policies or innovation policies, which we all know. So task, what does it mean, task? It means that, as we know, GVC policies are addressing tasks and not industries. So within GVC, policy should be addressing the capacity of firms and countries to build up capacity within specific tasks and not within more general industries. And what do I mean? I can try to explain you, referring to different type of policies, such as participation policies. So when we think about participation policies, in participation policies is not a general participation in the car industry, which should be addressed by policy, but is rather the specific task within the car industry which a firm or a country can address, depending on the specific comparative advantage of the different countries. In value capture policies, the same. So when policies are oriented to try to support upgrading, is not upgrading, generally speaking, within the car industry, but is upgrading, for instance, functional upgrading. So it means to address task. So what is the implication for policy? The implication is that policymakers need to adopt a much more granular view of the type of activities that they need to target to promote economic development. And as I will tell you at the end of my presentation, this means also to have access to a much more granular empirical evidence and different type of information and data which are different from the usual type of information used to elaborate policies. Linkages. Of course, linkages are key in GVC, and they can have different. They have a different and multiple role in GVC. For instance, linkages are a powerful channel through which countries and firms could access foreign knowledge and resources, which can be leveraged to improve technological and operational domestic capabilities. So linkages are a knowledge channel. Linkages are also important in terms of creating opportunities and to create incentive to improve local work and environmental conditions. Linkages can also have a negative impact because they can also have a channel through which economic shocks are transferred. So I mean, we have seen what has happened within GVC just after the outbreak of the pandemic. So linkages could represent a way through which economic shocks are transferred from one country to the other. So what does it mean? It means from the policymaker point of view that policymakers should regulate and strengthen linkages with the aim of promoting economic and social upgrading, and at the same time also guarantee countries' economic resilience. And finally, firms. And within GVC, there are two different types of firms, lead firms. And lead firms, we know they are the powerful actors. They define the terms and conditions of GVC. And therefore, the collaboration with lead firms could be a very powerful approach to accomplish policy objectives. But there are also suppliers, and suppliers need to be supported in order to be able to enter and to leverage a profitable relationship with lead firms. So policymakers should collaborate with GVC lead firms to upgrade local suppliers, to ensure fair treatment of workers, to adopt environmental sustainable business practice, and to build resiliency. So basically, these three dimensions are useful in terms of emphasizing some specificity of this GVC policy with respect to traditional policies, with respect to traditional policies. So let me now come to some conclusion and then to some implication for further research. In terms of conclusions, one important conclusion is that GVC policies are very complex. There are a lot of interaction within these policies with a lot of actors involved. And one of the effects of this complexity are unintended consequences. What do I mean with this? There are some interesting examples in our collection of papers. One is a paper by Gereffi, which is showing, for instance, the unintended consequences of the China-US trade war. Unintended consequences in the sense that one of the results of the China-US trade war has been upgrading. So Chinese, for instance, in the phone, in the mobile phone industry, as the US-China trade war has pushed Chinese company to upgrade technologically. So, and this is of course an unintended consequence. The second dimension I would like to emphasize is the role for supranational policies and institutions. Within GVC, there are clearly some coordination failures and some objectives which cannot be fixed by single government or by single country. And just to make an example is the recent minimum global corporate tax rate, which has been one of the results of the G20, but also, and maybe less known, is this recent LDC's GVC initiative, which was promoted for asking the WTO to introduce a sort of duty-free export for export coming from the least developed countries throughout the whole value chain. So there is this request at the level of the WTO to try to offer free duty-free export to LDCs along the value chain. So all these kind of initiatives cannot be single country initiative. They require some kind of supranational coordination. And the final point is clearly that within, to face GVC and to act within GVC, policymaker should assume what we can call a kind of brokering role in value chain coalition, trying to facilitate a dialogue between public and private stakeholders. Coming to implication for future research. I think there are a few interesting issues coming out from our collection of papers. The first one, I was already mentioning to it, is the need for new data and for the combination of existing database. And there are some interesting examples in our special issue. I just would like to mention a paper by Baum and colleagues in which they are combining the use of input-output data with product space data. And with this combination, they are able to understand, they do this on the car industry in South Africa. And so before using this combination of understanding the way in which South Africa participates to the GVC car industry and the product space information, the information from product space or from this Hidalgo database, what they are able to identify is exactly in which specific task South Africa has a potential comparative advantage in order to upgrade. And this is what I was referring when policies need to target task and not generically speaking one industry. So we think that in this specific area of data and combination of existing database, there is a lot of work to be done. There is also a need for more comparative across companies and across industry, and for more comparative studies and more longitudinal studies in order to evaluate dynamic trends and interaction and also possible trade-off. This is something which is very important. There are a lot of trade-offs, and these trade-offs, and this is the third point, are not clear at all. So very often there are cases in which, for instance, resiliency policy are increasing a firm's or a region's ability to deal with external shocks, but this is happening at the cost of GVC participation. Or there are cases in which labor standards are improving within GVC, but this is, so there is social upgrading, but this is happening at the detriment of GVC participation, of GVC value capture. So these trade-offs exist, and in our collection of papers, there are a lot of cases pointing to this trade-off, but there is not any serious studies really addressing the issue of trade-off, and the issue of trade-off is clearly crucial because it could be that the choice of going on one direction is then reaching some result, but having some unexpected result in another direction. So this is all. I would like to thank you very much for listening, and I will be very happy to try to answer to your question. Thank you.